Hello and welcome to this brief history on Kia. So first of all, Kia is an enormous business, employs over 33,000 people, makes over or around $20 billion a year, and operates 14 different manufacturing and or research facilities around the planet. And at least 3 of those large manufacturing facilities are in Korea. And it all started with a man named Kim Cheol-ho. He was born in 1905, and when he was 39 years old, he actually registered the original Kia name, Kyungsung Precision Industry, in Seoul, Korea. And for the next 6-7 years, there isn't much I could find on what Kyungsung Precision Industry produced, but in 1952 it's responsible for the first mass-produced Korean bicycle, and this will be the first of many firsts for Kia. And it was called the Sam Chuli, also known as the 3000 Hai or Li Ho. And Kia went on to actually produce motorcycles after this. But before it did any of this, it's important to understand that this all happened right in the middle of the Korean War. The Korean War happened from 1950 to 1953, and in 1952, Kia became Kia. It went from Kyungsung Precision Industry to Kia Industries in 1952. At that point, it had coined the Sam Chuli as this first Korean bicycle, and by the next year, it was making motorcycles. It was actually only 4 years after that it came up with its first logo or brand symbol identity in 1957, and that same year it entered a partnership with Honda to produce these lightweight motorcycles. And there's a really neat photo here of what looks like a Mitsubishi Fuso truck with a whole bunch of Kia Honda branded motorcycles. So after this successful relationship with Honda in Japan, and I should say it's actually kind of interesting that early on in Kia's development, these relationships with Japanese companies were really important. Honda and Mazda were key in the early growth of Kia. But to this day, if you go to Japan, you won't find Kias. They're not in that market, but they are fundamental to its growth early on. So Honda and Kia worked together to the 1960s, and then a relationship with Mazda is created, and in 1962 they start producing these very lightweight trucks, these truck trikes, and they produce thousands, 9,000 of these models called the K360s, and they produce a T600 model too, which is, they're these really charming, I don't know, for an entrepreneur or an intrepid person. I mean, you could run a business for one of these trucks, and I think it actually facilitated a lot of growth for a lot of small businesses. And they actually, in 1964, you can see this green circle with a little line through it. This became their symbol too. I don't even know if this was on the vehicles anywhere, but they were making and licensing vehicles for Mazda. And so this was quite fruitful through the 60s, and by 1973, Kia builds this mega factory called the Sahari plant in 1973, and by late 73, 74, it's making the people's car. It's got this relationship with Mazda. It's making these little 1,000cc cars, but it's also producing in Korea. It is the first manufacturer to make its own engines, these inline 4 cylinders. And Kia, part of its identity is it always wants to do things in-house. It wants to be able to produce the most of what it's making, the most of the car. So 65% of the car, and then in increasing amounts, when they made this Brisa back in 73 from the Sahari plant, Kia was producing 65+% of everything that went into that car. It had its own foundry. It was making engines. It could do sheet metal. It was a really fully equipped facility that was the catalyst for a lot of its growth. And this was the same time the founder of the business was dying. So he was there for Korea's first bike, and he was there, with this business he created that built and sold its, a Korean car to Koreans, even though it was licensed under Mazda. It wouldn't be till 1993 that Kia would produce its own chassis and its own vehicle from the ground up, and then it would actually sell that to America in 94. But anywho, so this factory was a huge catalyst. The relationship with Honda, then Mazda, was very successful, and then in 1991 it opened its Hyeongsang plant in 1991, which is where the Kia Niro is presently built. And it's where the Optima is built, and it's a critical factory in Kia's lineup of manufacturing plants. It was also during the 1990s that Asia had this huge industrial growth. Korea was experiencing 7 to 8% GDP, or just under 8% GDP growth each year, while the rest of the world is, developed world is experiencing 2, 3. USA was almost at 4, but Kia is expanding, and these Asian markets are growing very quickly. And this plant has its own racetrack, its own foundry. It has, an assembly plant, and as you'll see, Hyundai, when it partners with Kia, when it rescues them after the crisis, the Asian financial crisis, it gets all this stuff. There's lots of assets here that are being developed. And then they changed their logo in 1994. So it went from the 1986 logo, which is like overseas exports and has a one vibe. Then the 1994 logo is this global earth surround around the word Kia. So this is also when Kia comes out with the Kia Sophia. This is the first car that Kia develops from the chassis up. It's a completely Kia car. It's exported to the USA, and they sell 500,000 of these abroad and 100,000 in the first year to Korea, and it's very successful. But then in 1997, there's an entire collapse of the economy there. They went from almost 8% growth each year. They had all these foreign investors coming in. Anyway, apparently in Thailand, the Thai bought their currency. They unhitched themselves from the U.S. currency. And on July 2nd, in 1997, this became the trigger for an entire economic collapse. And apparently, if you had invested $1,000 the day before, you'd have $290 left. Like, you'd lose. People lost a lot of money, and the Kia went bankrupt. It was bought by Hyundai. But what's really interesting is, immediately after it got purchased, Hyundai becomes a 51% stake owner in it in 1997-98. But now Kia goes from an inexpensive car to being foreseen as a cheap car because it goes bankrupt. And then immediately after it gets purchased by Hyundai, they offer the leading powertrain warranty in the entire industry, the 100,000 mile engine powertrain warranty. So there's an entire flip on the perception of Kia, and so now they re-enter the market. And this is why I bring up the Priuses and the Honda Insight, is that in 1996, right before this entire crisis, this hybrid technology with the Toyota Prius, it was first domestically sold to itself in Japan in 1996, and then to the USA and internationally in 1997, the Gen 1, is that this all is happening as the financial crisis is happening, and Kia is experiencing this. Toyota and Honda are coming out with their hybrid technologies. So this 1997-98 moment is a big moment in the evolution of cars. And so yes, and remember, this is all nickel metal hydride. This is early battery technology, but a lot of the powertrains designed in this period with Prius using a number 1 and number 2 motor, so a driving electric motor and a hybrid starter generator style motor like the Niro. This is all showing up right around 1997-98. So I show the Insight here because, you know, they start with a 70 mpg style, you know, high mile per gallon concept car, which becomes the Gen 1 Insight. But then as soon as they go to a 4-door with the Honda, they have a lot of emerging technologies. Their IMA, integrated motor or assisted motor technology. You know, these things are only delivering 43 to 50 miles per gallon. And yeah, so this is very early hybrid technology with the Priuses. And, you know, the Optima in 2000 is a hugely popular car that comes out of Kia. And this plant that I mentioned that was built in 1991, it produces 3 million cars in the first 10 years. And then in 2005 to 2013, Kia exports and sells another 50 million cars. So Kia is exploding. In 2006, as we get to this part of the timeline, they hire a man named Peter Schreier, and, you know, he's responsible for the design of the Audi TT, a really iconic, you know, and he starts doing concept cars and more European-driven or European vision-driven cars in 2006, and for the next 10 years. He's part of the design of Kia, and they're very, so in 2006 they announced not only are they more efficient driven and minded, but they are driven by design, and they want to appeal, I think, to a European market too, which honestly, you know, I'll just tell you now, this is the Kia Niro plug-in hybrid channel. They sell about 28,000 of the Kia Niro hybrids each year here, but in Europe it's 80,000, and in some European countries it is like the most popular hybrid / plug-in hybrid car. So there, you know, Kia has markets all over the world. It's not just about the US. But they wanted to appeal to the European market, and this designer, this Peter Schreier, he's responsible for the Tiger grille, like the face of the car, which essentially became the iconic look of the Kia Niro. So he is responsible for that. He worked for Kia for about 10 years, and there was a ton of growth in this period. And as we close off the timeline, we can see in 2017, actually, the Kia set a world record for, it was the Gen 1 Kia Niro in 2017. It did 76 miles per gallon. It went from LA to New York City, 3,715 miles in only 4.1 tanks of gas. So they were hypermiling like crazy for that, but they got a world record for that, which kicked off the Kia Niro in the USA. But also the Optima, it was another Kia model before that held the world record. So that's where the Gen 1 comes from. Anyway, I hope this timeline was interesting, and I've yeah, really enjoyed the car and putting together this little bit of history. So thanks so much. All right, bye-bye.